Wondering how your mindset affects your life? How to bring more energy into your business and life? Millions of people around the world ask these same questions daily. You are in the right place. Learn practices that will help give your life the meaning and success you've been searching for. Welcome to the Charge Podcast, teaching you how to create habits around real goals every day. Practical life advice from those who made it. Here's your host, Gary Wilbers.
Do you struggle with being negative? Most people struggle with being negative. Being positive takes action. Using simple positive actions will allow you to win each day. Being negative is a discharge in 3 key areas. Number 1, your mindset to achieve your goals. Number 2, your influence on self and others. And number 3, your ability to learn and grow. Implementing simple positive actions into your life will allow you to win each day. Being positive takes action. So let's work to be positive. To receive a weekly video email from me on one simple positive action, subscribe to the series by going to chargepodcast.com to get the link to register today. Life is short, so why live your life by default when you can live your life by design? Make it a great day.
Welcome, Chargers. We're glad to have you back again this week. I tell you, we've lined up a great group of guests for this quarter, and I'm so excited to share them with you. And today we've done the same thing. But the thing I want you to think about as you're progressing through this year, what are you getting accomplished? Are you on target with your goals? Remember, this is the Charge podcast that says create habits around real goals every day. Maybe to be able to complete that goal, you've got to look a little bit harder on working on that habit that you're trying to create to be able to reach that. But today we're going to learn from a gentleman that really will help us with some of those ways that we can create that legacy. And Paul is his name. And I'll give you the rest of the details in a minute. But I want Paul to share with us, what problem will you solve for our Charge podcast listeners today, Paul?
Well, I am going to convince them that they need to have a fool in their life. And tell them how they can find a fool and what they should do with that fool.
Oh, right. This is going to be an interesting conversation. So now that's what you call a little bit of a hook. We've hooked you in now. So we'll ask Paul to give us also what 3 questions that I can ask, because our Charge podcast interview is really to help our audience learn from what they can really learn and the problem that you're going to help them solve, Paul.
Well, I think there's several things that everyone, but especially leaders, need to be aware of. First, I always ask them, are you an empathetic listener? It used to be that proactive listening was good enough. It's not anymore. So the first question I would ask them is, are you an empathetic listener? And the reality is that when you and I grew up, Gary, we weren't allowed to be personal in the workplace. It was taboo. You were going to be a professional. And if nothing, but if this may be the only lesson that it's taught us, the pandemic taught us, is that doesn't work anymore. Yep. You now have to have a mix of professional and personal in the relationship, because that's what we're looking at in the workplace, and also in your personal life. So we've gone from transaction to relationship. That requires we no longer be proactive, but we be empathetic listeners. Second one, are you perpetually curious? The reality is that if you're not, you're going to be blindsided. You need to always be looking for trouble. And if you're not, trouble's looking for you. And the third thing is, are you embracing your failures? Because I believe that life is that yin and yang that we see all the time, that symbol that we see a lot of tattoos. I've determined that if we don't embrace our failures, we miss 50% of life's opportunities. Those were the 3 questions I'd put out there, and I'd say those are thought questions that people need to spend some time on.
Well, great. I can't wait to have some discussion around that. And really what you talked about already, it kind of intrigues me as I get into the podcast to be able to really dig in to help our listeners learn from. Paul Glover is the No B.S. workforce development coach, a recovering trial lawyer and an ex-felon, an unabashed Starbucks addict, and a Chicago Bears fanatic. The author of WorkQuake, an online course creator, and he's a speaker on business and leadership topics, and he's a member of the Forbes Coaching Council. Paul, it is great to have you on the podcast. Welcome.
Well, Gary, first, thank you for the opportunity. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you and your audience.
Well, I call them chargers, and they would love to know as we're talking about this. And I know we'll come into that point of the problem you're going to solve of having that fool in their lives. But let's just start off with that first question, because you are a workforce development coach. So when we talk about, are you an empathic listener? I know what you mean by that, I think, to a point, because I teach some empathic listening to my audience. I just did a leadership class yesterday, and we talked about empathic listening. But will you share with them first what that is, and then why it's so important in the workforce now?
Well, again, back to the concept of the mingling of professional and personal. Now requires that we go from transactional relationships to relationship building. And the only way you can do that is to know about the other person. Not what they're doing, but how they're feeling. And this runs contra to most leaders' thought process. By the way, I also say you have to have boundaries. Don't get intimate. Stay personal.
Right.
But yeah, and so how you do that is that when you engage someone in a conversation of any nature, a part of that has got to be to reach out and ask, how do you feel? And you can do that in a variety of ways. But most of the time, leaders are so busy and so rushed that they say, how are you doing? What are you doing is how that's translated. And that means you're interested in about the work and how I'm doing the work. And that's absolutely a part of this relationship. It is still a work relationship. But you've got to reach out beyond that. And that's where empathetic listening comes in. And especially over the last 2 years, people have had so many issues and are still on the edge. You look at the statistics for burnout, they're record high. You look at the changing of jobs that goes with this concept of the Great Resignation. And you also look at people who finally just said, I've had enough, and they've quit, they've retired. And that's why that now requires us to take another look. If we want to have a relationship that is meaningful in the workplace and engage people, I mean, by the way, I love the fact that we all know the buzzwords, engagement. The problem is that we keep forgetting what that means. We somehow believe that it's still about if I pay you, you're going to be engaged. No, you're not. If I pay you, I get your time. And I get the minimal amount of effort to keep the job. And obviously satisfy your own internal motivation. But if I want engagement, and let me use a different word, commitment. I believe that commitment is where we need to be aimed when we start talking about working with our employees, not as employees, but as partners. And we've got this myth out there that we continue to repeat it. For the last 20 years, Gallup has done engagement surveys. And of course, as you're shaking your head, you know, just like I know, that the level of engagement has not gone up beyond a third of the workforce. In fact, 20% of the workforce is actively disengaged. I'll tell you that those are the toxic employees that create a toxic work environment. And by the way, I call them the working dead. And they just hang around because we don't do anything about them. And now it's worse than that, Gary. We're so afraid we can't find replacements. We tolerate bad behavior. Because if that person leaves, who am I going to get to replace them? It's terrible when you come to hiring people. Is it really? If it is, then I suggest you take a look at how you're hiring and what your environment and your culture looks like.
Yeah, I love that. And I talk a lot about culture, and so many people get it wrong because they think it's the games and the freebies and everything else. That is not culture at all. And what you're talking about is baseline, really, but something that's changed in the workforce, because you and I have been in the workforce both for a while on that side of it, and something we have to learn. And the thing I was just talking to a business owner before this is if we don't change, we won't be able to find our workforce.
Correct.
And that becomes a challenge.
It is. And there is such a thing about, oh my God, I can't retain them. First, I can't hire them. Then I can't retain them. And I always look at that and I go, what do you look, I just don't believe it's that hard. I'm sorry. I operate off a very simple system in my coaching program. I call it the 3 A's. If you want a relationship relationship to succeed and to prosper. The 3 A's are, I'm going to be attraction. And attraction has nothing to do with how good looking you are. It has to do with the positive energy that you put out to your world, to your environment, to your employees, to the coworker. Attraction is absolutely essential. And if you are attracting, you will get the right people. The second A is attention. Are you paying attention to those people? It's always interesting whenever I talk to a business owner, the first thing they want to show me or tell me about is how profitable they are. And my first thing is, look, if you're looking at a spreadsheet, you need to remember one thing. Behind every number on that spreadsheet is a face. Do you know that face? Because if you don't know that face and you don't interact with that face, that number disappears. So instead of focusing on the number, let's focus on the face behind that number. Pay attention to them. By the way, there's so many ways we do that, right? Are we going to give them training, upskilling? Are we going to promote? Are we going to, you name it, engage them, really engage them? And the third A is appreciation. I am stunned by how little we say thank you. During the pandemic, I would, when I got my coaching leaders, I would go, look, on Friday, when you're getting ready to let your virtual workforce go home, don't say, see you on Monday. That's like an invitation back to hell. Terrible week. I go, I'm stuck. It's miserable. I may be sick. We're looking at a pandemic. No, don't do that. Say, I appreciate you. It is so simple. Thank you very much for hanging in there with me. Thank you very much for achieving the goals we did this week. So those are the 3 A's. And if you work those correctly, you'd have no problem finding or retaining employees. Why would you? They would love to be with a company that actually embodied the philosophy of the 3 A's.
Yeah, and it really sets up the relationship building that you believe is so important. Attraction, attention, and appreciation. And that's what people are looking for in the workforce. And the one thing I want to believe, and I know you would agree with this, Paul, it's not just the millennials and Generation Z. The boomers and Xers, we want this too. So don't think it's that generation. It's not my generation. No, those people could be with you 20 years, but if you're not doing those 3 A's right now, you're giving them opportunity to say they're going to go look for it somewhere else. Absolutely.
And by the way, you raised a good point. Anyone who thinks that we didn't want that, we were just taught we couldn't have it. Mm-hmm. And in fact, if we tried to have it, it was a problem, because then the supervisor would say, you don't need any of that crap because you're getting a paycheck. So I don't want to hear any whining or moaning or that you want something else. And so we learned to keep our mouths shut. Fortunately, we raised children that decided that they had a right to speak. In fact, we gave them that right, didn't we? Family vacations. I know when I went on a family vacation, my father would walk out of the door with a suitcase in his hand and say, get in the car. I'd have no idea where we were going. I didn't know. It'd be 20 miles down the road, and I'd finally say, where are we going? Our children, my wife's and my children, we would have to have a family discussion about where we're going to go on vacation. The first time that happened, I asked my wife, I said, are they going to help pay? Because I didn't get to make the decision. They're raised that way. So guess what? We've raised them. And when I talk to leaders in my coaching program, I say, would you stop belly aching about these people? They're your children.
I say the same thing when I talk about it. We created them.
That's right.
There's one to complain about them.
Yeah, and by the way, somehow we thought there was some of the workforce coming. I don't know where we thought they were coming from. No. So let's get over that. And let's understand that the needs of the people in the workplace have absolutely changed, rightfully so. We're not running assembly lines anymore. Right. We've got knowledge employees who are doing knowledge work.
Yeah.
Different mindset, and smarter too.
Yeah. Well, great concept there. And I hope the business owners are really hearing it, because it doesn't matter if you've owned your business for 3 years, 10 years, or 30 years. If you're not changing, the workforce has changed. And if you want to be in business I've just told this business owner this that I was coaching with, is if you're not willing to change over these next 5 years, it's going to be tough to be in business.
Oh, absolutely.
You're not going to always find them. And I know a lot of business owners, and we could go down this rabbit hole, is you're not going to find them all in your community where you used to be. You are going to have more of a remote workforce. And I know I've got some that said, oh, I'll never do that. I think you'll be challenged.
And first, that immediately raises a red flag to me, because it says the only reason I've got that attitude is I believe that for people to be productive, I have to be able to see them work.
Right.
Butts in the seat. And seriously, if we're looking at developing relationships, every relationship, personal and professional, is based on trust. Right? My contention is, if you don't trust them, why are they still working for you? And if you do trust them, quit acting like a prison guard. Just get your head around the concept that these people will do what you want them to do as long as you have reasonable expectations and you treat them properly. This concept, theory X, employees don't want to work. Oh my God, are we still trying to get our heads around the fact that that's wrong? Anyway.
Yeah. We could go there a long ways. Let's go to that next question you talked about, because I think that will play into what we've talked about some already. Are you perpetually curious? And it really plays into what we've already talked about. You should be curious of how the business trends are changing, but also in the workforce, what are some other things they should be perpetually curious about?
Well, first, it's always interesting, because when I have someone who says, well, I just don't know what they need, my question is, well, have you asked them?
Right.
Oh, by the way, if they're not, look, I am a strong believer in the concept of psychological safety. If you haven't provided psychological safety, guess what? Your employees are not going to tell you anything but what they think you want to hear, if they say anything at all. My wife and I came to the conclusion, raising two redheads, that at some point they figured out they could lie and get away with it. And so, at one time, my wife's got that mother look. She'd look at them, they just start crying and confess. Well, at some point, they finally figured out, I don't have to do that. So we realized that we had to do something to have a relationship where we would hear what was really going on. We instituted free night. Once a month at dinner, you could tell us anything, and there were no repercussions, none. And that included their friends. We found it. Now, obviously, if we thought they were killing somebody, they'd kill each other. But no, and it took 3 sessions, 3 months of our saying that. And how did we do it? We told them things we did when we were kids that would have just been terrible if we got caught, right? So the deal was that we established authenticity and some vulnerability. And then we created a psychologically safe place for them to tell us the truth. And they did. By the way, you'll note that I'm bald. At some point I said, don't tell me anymore. I don't want to know. But I suggest that leaders have got to have that same deal. And the way you do this is you are present where your employees are. Whenever I start with a company that's doing a third shift, the first thing I ask the president or CEO is, when was the last time you were on the third shift? And it's crickets. And I'm like, and by the way, I'm sarcastic by nature. So I say, oh, they're not part of your company, right? I mean, they're not your employee. Oh, no. Well, then get up, get off your lazy butt at midnight and go to the third shift, because I guarantee you that's where the action is. Right? Because that's far removed from management. You've got supervisors who are running the whole show. And by the way, they control your overtime. They control whether you're working extra days. They control time off. So guess what? They get to control the workforce. You need to go there unannounced. You don't get to take an entourage, and you don't tell anybody you're coming. Now, the first time that happens, they'll call the police because they don't know who you are. Who's that intruder in the lunchroom? So you sit down at the table and you wait. And when they come in and sit down, you start talking to them and you tell them why you're there. I'm here to hear about you and what your needs are. Now, the third session, it's always the third one, they'll start to tell you, as long as they know there are no repercussions. By the way, I assume you hold focus groups. I hold focus groups all the time. I'm a complete stranger. I walk in, I sit down with a group of 10, and I go, listen, anonymity prevails. Whatever you tell me, I will tell them, but I'm not going to tell you who said it. They will talk to a complete stranger who gives them that assurance and tell me stuff that I'm like, oh my God, and something the owners don't know. So listen, that's that perpetual curiosity of give people the opportunity to share, and they will.
Yeah. And it's so amazing what you said. Sometimes if they know them or don't know them even very well, it takes that third session. It's that amazing, that power of three again, we know as being speakers and authors, it comes up all the time of that power of three. Yep. But you really learn things that you can then make a difference. And that becomes the key is, are you learning from your people? And if you're building those relationships, you know the things that are going to make them help you with really retaining those people, attracting those and having their attention so they stay long-term. I love that. The last thing you talked about is really talking about how you should embrace your futures on that side of it. And we've talked about some things already that we've got to change as business owners. Yeah. And I have a lot of business owners that listen to this podcast, and I am a believer in this, that it's one of the messages we have to get out to get people to realize it wasn't just COVID that has changed this. The world is changing. So we've got to embrace those differences, and we've got to embrace the future coming. So I'm curious what you want to share, what you would share with our audience there.
Well, it absolutely is about the future, and also part of that future is leaders seem to believe that they are supposed to be beyond reproach. And they fail to be authentic or vulnerable because they will not talk about the things that did not go well. And my contention is the future is full of good things and bad things. And again, I don't believe we can avoid either one. Most of them are not of our making. We've got COVID, we've got the weather, we've got competition. We have all sorts of things. And instead, if we're going to have a future together, we've got to be willing to accept the shortcomings of being a human being. So I'm going to do those for you, and I want you to do those for me. And we will share those because that's when we actually learn. We learn about how we need to be based not on what happened in the past. Everybody thinks, well, that's how I learned my experience. You know what? Right? That's what we call our failures, by the way. We call our past failures experience. Yeah. And I'm okay with that, except for the fact that we don't stop failing just because we've had some. There's not a number once you reach it, you're like, well, that's all my failures. No, of course not. And by the way, we are in the most chaotic time in my lifetime, and I've been around for a while, seen a lot of stuff happen, and this is obviously the most chaotic. It's also the most unsafe, but it's also the time that greater risk is a part of the relationship building. You must take risk. And risk, of course, entails failure. But for the future to be better, you've got to be willing to take that risk. But we need to take it together. And I talk about leaders and the ability for storytelling, because I believe it's absolutely essential that leaders tell a story. And what's the story about? Well, Joseph Campbell came up with a term. I use it all the time. It's the hero's journey. And I'm the head of this organization, the leader, but I need you. I want you to join me on a journey. And the journey will have adversity. And by the way, I believe adversity is the spice of life, right? Think about this. Little Red Riding Hood would be nothing but a walk in the woods if it wasn't for the wolf. It's that meaning of adversity and overcoming adversity that makes you a hero. You can't be a hero without adversity, without having something to overcome. And I want people to join me on this journey. And I'm going to talk to you about what the purpose is, not to make money, but it's to do other things. It's to take care of people who are on the journey. It's also to take care of our customers, take care of our families, take care of our community. And therefore, we need to join together. By the way, we will fail. It's built into the process, but that's not going to stop us from reaching our future, our goal.
Yeah, that becomes the key. It's about that continual change, learning, and then embracing what's coming and then sharing that. I love your hero's journey that you talk about. You end up becoming the guide and you let your employees be the hero. And when that happens, man, that's when you create magic. That's when you create that positive culture that people want to be part of. And they will share that back with you. I've had last 2 weeks, I've had 2 employees reach back out to me and give me a compliment that used to work for us. But we developed leaders, and that's what our people are wanting. They're wanting to grow and develop and be mentored. And that's the key business owners have to hear is you've got to grow your people, because if not, they're going to find it somewhere else. And that's part of embracing that future. They're not going to just show up 8 to 5 and just be your employee for the next 30 years and move on down the line. Those days are over.
They are over, and rightfully so. What a way to spend a third of your life. It's not if you're not creating. And by the way, I believe in legacy. I think that everyone should be about their legacy. It doesn't matter what position you have in the organization. You should be connected to a purpose. You should be building legacy. You should enjoy your work. I have problems with people who want to be happy at work. I'm looking for satisfaction. Have some satisfaction. And enjoy what you do. And I think that absolutely worked. And you mentioned the stage of positive energy is absolutely huge. You can tell when someone is able to do that, like you do. I can tell right now, we are having that conversation. That is an exchange of energy, right? One comment will generate a comment, a remark, an observation. See, that is what the workforce should look like. Not here's what I want you to do it. What is that? There's that old saying, if I want your opinion, I'll give it to you. Don't do that, because guess what? They do have an opinion. And if you don't listen to it, they will go someplace where someone does.
Yes. And that becomes the real key, is giving them that opportunity to be able to share that opinion. Instead, these old days of once a year, you sat down with them to do a review. It's like getting that information all the time, because they know what the best processes are, how they can change something, improve something, what they see as bottlenecks in your organization. So using your people to get there. Paul, I know we could have a conversation for the next couple hours and would have a great time. And hopefully our listeners can tell it's been one of those conversations of really kind of how can we take it and move forward. But I want you to share, if you would, number one, you've got a book out, WorkQuake. If you would share a little bit about that, and then also share with them if they want to touch base with you and connect with you, how can they do that?
Well, first, there it is.
All right. Congratulations.
Gary, this book's 10 years old. And when I finished writing this book, and I tell people, I think the writing is arduous. I was compelled. And the reason I was compelled was the conversation that we're having right now, I wanted to have 10 years ago. But you know what? Nobody else wanted to have it. Well-being was just a word that you were like, what are you, a hippie, a tree hugger? You take self-care. What are you talking about? So the book, when I wrote the book, I told my editor, I said, I hate this book because I know nobody's going to read it. They're just not. Half of the book is about operational improvement and how that comes about with employees, engagement. And you mentioned something. If you want to improve the process, you talk to the people who work with the process. Don't try to do that. You have no idea. The worst thing in the world is for you to think you know what that job consists of. You better do it. But the second half of the book was about well-being, was about sleep, was about proper eating and hydration, was about exercise. And it was like leaders were like, I don't have time for all that. Well, guess what? Suddenly my book is extremely popular because it's extremely effective, relevant right now. So yeah, I'm thrilled with my book. In fact, I'm probably going to do an addendum to it just to say, I told you so. If nothing else. But yeah, so anyway, the book is valuable just because it gives people the opportunity 365 days to look at something and say, okay, I'm going to try it. Because not everything works for everyone. However, given that cafeteria approach, everybody finds something they can eat and use.
Well, great. How can they touch base with you? What's your website?
It's paulglovercoaching.com.
Okay. And I know Paul will do a 20-minute free coaching session with you. I'm sure
Absolutely.
they can get on that, how you can create your personal legacy. So if you've connected, please get in touch. We'll have that all in show notes because we know our chargers not sitting there waiting to write down your website. So we'll have it all in show notes. Just go to chargepodcast.com. We'll have all that information there. And I'll share that again here at the very end. But Paul, before I let you go, I've got 2 questions I ask every guest. And the first one, I call it my recharge round. Charge is an acronym or a mantra for me. Create habits around real goals every day. What habit do you think's led to success in your life?
The first thing is I do morning gratitudes. I believe that you need to set your mind in a positive fashion every morning. 5 o'clock, I'm on my way to Starbucks, and I have a list that I've already created, and I go through my list, not the whole list, by the way, because it's over 200 gratitudes. So I take 5 a day, and I focus on those 5 and how happy I am that I've got, most of them are people, by the way, that I have these people in my life. And I tell myself, not only am I happy, here's why. Because I believe that, Simon Sinek, what's the why? Well, if you want somebody in your life and you say they're fantastic, you need to identify why rather than they're just kind of hanging around. So no, I go through that every day. That would be the first thing I would recommend to everybody. Get up, get yourself going and take 5 minutes, take a walk. You should be exercising anyway, and do your gratitudes.
Well, we've talked about this second one a little bit because we said about embracing your failures. So my question to you is, we've all made failures. If we had a do-over, what would it be? So what would be your do-over or failure that you would embrace and say, I've learned from this? And
well, I already did, Gary. You already mentioned it when you did my bio, right? I'm not only am I a recovering lawyer, but I'm also an ex-felon. I went to prison for 5.5 years. And it took me 2 years to get to the point where I was willing to accept responsibility for going to prison. I spent 2 years with revenge fantasy, going to get even with everybody who put me in prison. And within that second year, it suddenly dawned on me that, in fact, I was the reason I was in prison. And that's why we'd started off about everyone needs a fool in their life. We don't see our blind spots. That's why we call them blind spots. And mine, I have many, but the ones that really got me was, first, I have ego, and second, I wanted to belong. And because of the nature of the law I practice, labor and employment law, I associated with a lot of bad guys, bad people. And I was a bad guy wannabe. And because of that, and the desire to belong, and the initiation into that group was doing bad things. And I wanted to be there so bad that I committed those crimes, and then I went to prison. So I decided, look, obviously, I'm not smart enough to figure out what my blind spots are. So I need to ask someone that I trust, who has my well-being in their mind, to act as my fool. Now, the fool comes from medieval times when the king was on the throne, and you see that little guy standing at the bottom who's dressed up in a kind of a clown outfit, and everybody believes he was an entertainer. But the reality was he was not an entertainer, he was a trusted advisor. Because he acted like an insane person, he was able to tell the king when they were making a bad decision. And so you need to look for a fool in your life who you trust, who will tell you the truth about the gift of truth. You don't know how valuable the gift of truth is. And we don't get it often. First, we don't want it often. Yeah. See, I didn't want it. If you talked to me before I went to prison, I would say, God, I don't care what your opinion is about me. But the reality is the gift of truth is so valuable because it allows us to be better, to improve, to embrace failure, to learn from failure, and not to do the bad things that caused us to fail personally. And so, yeah, I advocate. I've got a presentation I do about everybody, especially every leader, needs a fool in their life, because I can point to you so many examples of leaders who have just absolutely blown things up, and nobody was telling them that this was going to happen because they were either afraid of them or for their own purposes, they didn't want to tell them. So my contention is that we need to find the fool. And that fool has got to be given the psychological safety to tell us the truth about us. And then we have to do something with it. You can't take this. We keep talking about getting information in. You better do something with it. Otherwise, the fool says, well, no, if you're not going to reflect, and you're not going to question, and you're not going to start acting differently, then the information was useless, and do it again. The same thing with any employee. When you say, give me your opinion, and they tell you something that you know needs to be fixed, and you don't fix it, last time they're going to tell you the truth.
Right.
Why would they? It's a waste of time. So anyway, that's the concept of the fool. Everyone needs one. I would suggest to you leaders need more than one. They can be a coach. They can be a mentor. They can be a family member. It doesn't matter. I tell people fools are all around us. Like the medieval fool, they're disguised, right? Yes. We need to see through the disguise and give them permission to give us the gift of truth. To me, that's the most valuable lesson that anybody listening to this podcast can have. Find yourself a fool. I actually do a presentation, and if it's okay with you, it's on YouTube. I will have a link to that because I would like for that to be in the show notes. And it is me talking about this experience in front of a audience of 400 managers and talking about how they need a fool.
Definitely. We'll put that in show notes. Paul, you send that over and we'll have that. I tell you right there, I mean, you've given truth bombs throughout the thing, but you have shared with us, some really nuggets that I hope people take away. And one of the things I'd ask my listeners to do is, this is one of those podcasts you may want to go back through and listen again, because there's a lot of great information there, but how important it is for us as leaders and business owners to really have someone that can give us that gift of truth, because otherwise you get all yes people. The problem is your organization is going to go down, is really all that happens. I always said, I don't want a bunch of yes people on my team. I want people that will question things, because that's what makes us better. And we continue to strive to get better each and every day. And that's really the tree. And that's where you create that legacy, and you can create a legacy with yourself. And we're all ultimately wanting to find that. And you can tell why Paul Glover is giving himself to our listeners today is because he's sharing his legacy with us. Paul, I can't thank you enough for being on the Charge podcast.
Well, thank you so much, Gary. And by the way, I can tell by our interaction that you are a fool. And
and I take that as a great compliment.
It is. I tell people, I know so people hear that and they go, what the hell? No. You're absolutely right. I believe that is one of the greatest compliments you can give someone, because you have the courage, the wisdom, and the care to want to tell people, give them that gift of truth. And it is so valuable. And people need it. And unfortunately, they don't have it. So thank you for being a fool.
Well, thank you very much for that. And people, please check out Paul Glover's. He told you he wrote the book 10 years ago. But it's really true now. So you've got to pick it up. WorkQuake is that. I'm sure you can get it on all the online places. Check out his website again, paulglovercoaching.com. He's got some great information on there. So please check him out. And we'll put a link in the show notes to the YouTube piece that he talked about there at the very end here. So we'll have all that information available for the Chargers. And Chargers, the big thing I tell you is, do you have your fool? Have you defined who's going to be your fool? That's the only action item I'm going to give you. And if you're coming on at the very end and you're wondering, you need to rewind then, because you'll understand what we mean. We don't mean it in a bad way. It's the person that's going to give you that gift of truth. Who is your fool? And if you don't have that, my action is figure out who that person is going to be for you. Paul, Thank you again for joining us, my friend.
Gary, thank you for the opportunity.
Chargers, that's all you have to do is go out and find your fool today. We're going to end the podcast on that note. Go out and make it a great day. Come back and see us next week. Thanks for joining us.
This podcast is ended, but your life doesn't just stop. To continue your inspiring journey, head over to chargepodcast.com and access all the tools and resources mentioned on today's show. If you enjoyed this episode, consider sharing with somebody who may also benefit from the advice provided. That's chargepodcast.com. Until next time, charge in business and life.